The Sunken Temple loot has finally been buffed. Season of Discovery is finally seeing an update, and the update went live already. So you can log in and check some of your gear to see if your character got better. A lot of the gear from Sunken Temple went from blue to epic, and a lot of the items, especially caster items, did get a little bit of a buff. But was it enough to put casters on par with melee? Was it enough to make everybody happy? I'm not sure. That's something you have to answer for yourselves, but let's look at it really briefly. There is a very solid list over on Wowhead right now showing some of the changes. Some of them are really good. Like, let's look at this belt, which was not used by basically anybody. This was 12 stamina, 36 attack power. Now this belt is 9 agility and 32 attack power. So that is actually gonna be your best belt. Instead, you were using a 15 agility belt as a hunter as your best in slot ranged belt. Now, that is just one of the things just showing what the changes are, but mostly it looks like almost every weapon in the raid went from blue to epic. That also, of course, counts shields, and Atlas loot is already updated, but you can see things like the gun axe, the Gax. The Gax is actually a useful item. This is actually something that most people are going to overlook, but it's one of the craziest items in the game because the actual on use is off of GCD. So you can use it as a tank for pulling, and it'll just pull things off in Narnia. This is actually a viable weapon now, 18 strength, 50 DPS, and this is, as a reference, almost as good as Chiefsbane. Not really, like for warriors, but it is a decent alternative. 35 strength and 1 crit is just obviously way too good, but the DPS is pretty close to on par, and that's going to be on trend for most of the melee weapons, although there are even better melee weapons. I'm going to cover kind of some of the better items really quickly, and then I'll allow you guys to log in and use Atlas or go to Wowhead and check out all of the best items. But another item that is actually useful now is the Bloodied Head Spike. This is the two-handed weapon for ranged hunters. Now it has 22 agility, 1 crit, 1 hit. It is actually viable now for ranged hunters instead of using 2 one-handers that are not from the actual raid itself. It's not actually going to be BIS, and ranged hunters still won't be able to use double mana oil. I don't know why I stuttered on that so much. Then if we look at some of the caster loot, caster weapons in general, things like this mace that got buffed for 1 hit, 20 spell damage. One of the other really good ones are things like the Drake Stones. These have now been buffed to give an extra 7 spell damage. I think it's actually 9 spell damage total. They also changed some items like these cursed slime scale bracers. They weren't cloth beforehand. Now they are epic and cloth. The 148 armor is insanely good for meta warlocks. The armor values of these are just crazy because of the conversion for meta warlocks. So 1 hit and 11 spell damage. A lot of the items got buffed somewhere between 3 and like 9 spell damage. So overall it's going to add up, but it's definitely going to look like they're small buffs for most of the items. A lot of the random items still won't actually be your BIS. Things like the Blistering Rage Hammer, definitely useful, something you absolutely can use, and a chance on hit to increase your attack speed by 10%. Definitely very solid, and 50 DPS, 3.7 speed, super slow. This thing is very, very useful, but it's not as good, again, as getting Chieftain's Bane. So everyone knows that classic WoW players pretty much only ever look at what's absolutely your BIS, and if it's not your best in slot for DPS purely, it's quite literally useless. Then again, to look at some of the bigger caster items that have changed, the Visage of the Exiled. This helmet now has shadow and fire spell damage on it, 20 shadow and fire spell damage, and also your normal damage and healing by 21. This was a huge change. They got rid of the spirit on here and reduced the intellect to rework how it works. So 1 hit and 41 spell damage and 15 intellect is a very, very solid item now. So there's a lot of items that definitely are going to be good. Now, this is an insane weapon for like all Horde mostly, but Horde getting a very nice buff, especially if you are a warrior, because this is an axe. The Sharpened Tooth of Randicus is now 11 strength, 1 hit. This is probably in a contender for the glaives in here, to be brutally honest. It's might even be better. This is actually probably your best weapon, and that's just a fact. It's kind of nice. A lot of other items did get buffed, but Again, a lot of things did see kind of smaller buffs. If we look at things, most things as a melee didn't change, a lot of offset items didn't change, and a lot of items saw some smaller buffs, but everything else pretty much is pretty solid now. And every item is basically, mostly all weapons have gone to epic, as well as there's a ton more epics in the raid. So this does mean that there is going to be a completely reworked BIS list for essentially everyone moving into this phase. And it also means that with this longer phase, we know that this phase is getting extended, that there are items to go back and hunt for within the raid. Now, how much of a DPS increase are they going to be? Not absolutely massive, not game breaking. They're definitely not bringing casters on par with melee, and there's really no way to work around that unless you get something like debuffs and buffs for casters that are strong enough to make them actually viable against a single target boss, considering how well melee scale with debuffs and buffs. Like Sunder Armor by itself is just so insanely strong, and it scales ridiculously, especially with warriors. So we'll see how that all pans out, especially with the plans for level 60, and especially with the PTR. Hopefully we will see how the classes get reworked. And that's our update for Season of Discovery. I'm gonna go back to playing Elden Ring right now, but I'm honestly pretty excited to raid next week. I think this is gonna be a really fun time just looking at the items. I don't even want to look at every item, and I want them to drop and me to be like, oh, that's kind of cool. So either way, I'll see you guys all on the next one.